Now I'm going to reveal what I think is the most common reason for a Mk5 Golf GTI failing its MOT test and show you how to fix it for not an awful lot of money. Hello guys, and welcome back to the VolksWizard channel. Today's video is episode 3 of Project Edition 30. In episode 1 I collected the car and diagnosed problems with the thermostat and the crank sensor. In episode 2 I fixed those two problems for the princely sum of just £44. Check out that video if you haven't seen it yet. Today, episode 3 was meant to include the MOT test, which means the car can be driven legally here in the UK at last. But as you can see, I've swapped the original BBS wheels for these temporary wheels because the BBS are having their colour changed by Prestige Wheel Centre. And while I did that, I noticed another fault with this car that would mean it would fail the MOT test. And it's probably the most common reason why a Mk5 would fail the MOT test. So we're going to deal with that at the end of the video. In the meantime, we've got two other problems to sort out. Now at the end of episode 2, I showed you a new fault code the car had started logging. I suggested this might be to do with a failing PCV valve block, a very common problem on Mk5 Golf GTI. It's basically the breather, and one of the symptoms is that you get a higher than usual idle speed. But another key symptom with PCV valve failure is that you get suction when you take the filler cap off with the engine running, and we didn't have any of that. So I've got to admit I made a bit of a beginner's mistake there, because if you find a new problem when you put the car back together after doing a job, more often than not it will relate to what you've done. So on checking my work, I found that the throttle body boot needed tightening up, and on doing that it now idles perfectly. So the PCV valve is actually good, but we're going to replace it later in this video, because when it does inevitably fail, it will probably be quite soon, it can do a lot of damage. But before we do that, let's try and fix those horribly cloudy headlights. Now hopefully from that angle you can see the exterior of this headlamp lens is cloudy, and that's because it's not made from glass, it's made from polycarbonate, which is better at resisting stone chips. It's what they use for bulletproof glass, but unfortunately over the 16 years this car's been on the planet, the sun has caused this marring. You can actually see where the bonnet shuts over the light, there's like a tan line as if it was the bikini line, where this section of the light is still good and here it's sort of turned yellow. The good news is we can restore this in exactly the same way we'd restore paintwork, and that is by taking a tiny bit of the top of the lens off to reveal good polycarbonate underneath. To do that we use the same stuff we do for polishing paintwork. Apart from the fact we need to clean the lens with some glass cleaner just to get any dirt off it, we don't want to be rubbing that into it. And then we use a cutting compound, which is 3M Fast Cut Extreme. This is a pretty powerful cutting compound, so whilst you can't sort of burn the paintwork, you could probably damage the headlight with heat if you aren't careful, so do bear that in mind. We're using this compounding pad, which is a 3M one as well, which will do the bulk of the area, but down here where it's close to the bumper we can't really get to that easy, so I'm using this Dodo Juice little orange polish pad, and we're going to use some 3M masking tape because we're going to get right to the edge of the headlight, and that could mean damaging the paint if we don't cover it up. Oh, now there are some kits you can buy to do this, and I probably should have got one, but I don't think I'm going to need it, at least to get them good enough for an MOT. We'll see how we get on anyway. So let's start off then by taping up the paintwork surrounding the headlight. That's good. Let's apply some compound directly to the headlight. I know some people like to put this on the pad, but I don't. So, here we go. Yeah. I think we're getting there now. That's easily good enough to pass an MOT test, and as well as that it looks a lot better and it should work a lot better in the dark, which is really important if you want to enjoy your Mk5 GTI to the fullest all year round. But I'm not finished yet. We're going to do the smaller pad just to get rid of some of the marring down here, which is hard to do with a big pad like that one. So this is a Dodo Juice Spin Doctor, and it's just so easy to use. They stopped selling it now because they moved on to cordless ones. But yeah, it's good. It's my second one. The first one lasted many years, and bear in mind because I was selling cars, I was using it a lot more often than, you know, a hobby detailer would use. Just put a bit more down the bottom. There we go. Now, I think if you stopped at this point, you'd be quite happy because the headlight is already loads better, it'll work better, it'll look better, and it will hopefully pass the MOT as well. But a bit like polishing paint, you can carry on to the nth degree if you really want to. Well, I'm not that OCD, but I do have a finer compound that I'm just going to put on as a final sort of finish, which should give it a little bit more shine. It takes no time at all. Again, it's 3M, just because this is what I use when I was doing this every day. Extra fine plus. This big bottle's 35, 40 quid, but it's well worth it, goes a long way. There are smaller ones if you just want to use it for hobby use. Always a good idea to give it a shake, not to pull the lid off. And that's it. I'm just going to use a big pad this time because it's not such an aggressive compound or pad, so this won't do any damage if it touches other areas and that's covered up anyway. So yeah, it's a yellow 3M pad. It's softer than the compounding pad. Okay, it probably looks just the same to you down the camera, but to me it's a little bit shinier and better. It's not perfect, but it's taken years off the car. Now, you can also put the wax on here as well if you want it. I think that's a good job, and we'll now move on to the PCV valve. Okay, so what does PCV stand for? Well, it stands for positive crankcase ventilation. It's more commonly known as the breather. Every engine should have one, and that's because when the engines operate, gases can get past the piston rings and they need to be captured and sent back into the combustion process. If they weren't and they were let to go to air, then that's really bad for the atmosphere, because as you can imagine, combustion gases are really toxic. So this valve basically manages the flow of the gases into the engine. When the valve fails, you end up with boost going the wrong way and a bad idle speed, and in really bad cases you can end up with the crank seal blowing off, which can cause a massive and expensive oil leak. So it's best to deal with it prematurely, like I am now, or if you notice anything weird like idle speed playing up that's not to do with you not doing your job properly, then you should change it really quickly. The good news is it's not expensive. I think if you buy genuine, they're about 50 quid. I got this bizarrely off Amazon for the cheapest, 27 quid, delivered pretty quickly. It's Febby Bilstein, which, yes, it's not a genuine part, but it is very high quality from a trusted brand. And then the gasket, which I think is about 30 quid from VW at least, I got from Car Parts in Motion, and it was just under £10 delivered. So for £38-ish all in for this job, it's not an expensive job, is it? And the good news is it's really easy. To start off, we need to take the engine cover off, as usual on these engines, or the airbox, because it's built into it. So with some pliers, ideally these hose clip pliers. It doesn't take long at all. So just undo the mouth, unclip that from the engine cover, it should be clipped in. Undo the two metal clips for the outlet pipe, just make sure they don't fall off. And then unclip the hose on the side here. And that should be it. That will come off now. That's good. Now, don't pull at the front. Pull at the back. No, pull at the front, and the back will follow. That's it. And there we go. That's off. And the good news is there is the PCV block, so it's held on by a few screws, and there's a couple of, well, there's an input and an output, so one from the block to the valve, and then that feeds the gases into the inlet manifold there. So I'll just grab some tools and we'll get this off. It shouldn't take long at all. Okay, the good news is you only need a T25 Torx driver. You can also use a flat blade screwdriver as well, because it makes them doing the hoses a lot easier, even though you should be able to do them by hand. It's a bit fiddly. Now do bear in mind, this is nice and thin. If you're going to use a socket, you're never going to get it in past all these bits of the block, so you need something long and thin, at least as long as that, which is about 10 centimeters. Actually take the hoses off first if you want. So push down where the lines are on the hose, clip, and it should pull off like that, but I've already had that one off, I should tell you, so it was a bit of a struggle the first time, but just popping it off gently with a flat blade makes life a lot easier, but don't break it because you're not replacing these. Same again with this other hose onto it, and now just one more screw, and they're not very tight, these. I should have checked the torque setting, but let me just say they're not very tight. That should pull off. Part number is 06F12901F. I think it's been superseded, and the part I've got is the G. How old is this? Let's see. 21st of the 12th, 2006. So this is original, and therefore, yeah, not probably in the best of health. Now this is a gasket which you don't get with the new valve block, so don't forget to order it. You could probably reuse it. It looks in pretty good condition, to be perfectly honest, but for the sake of 10 quid, it's not worth it. Okay, so that's the new gasket, and it's pretty obvious which way it goes in. Yep, fits really, really nicely. So that's good. And then let's make sure we get this the right way around. That's round, that's that way. Okay. Okay, let's get the screws in. Yeah, probably not a good idea to drop them at this point. Okay, just give them a quick nip, just make sure they're tight. You can see the block being pushed into the rocker cover as you tighten them up, so you get tension against the gasket, so it should be nice and square on the mounting sort of flange, which you can still see. Job done. That's a new PCV valve we don't have to worry about for a very, very long time. Now I'm going to reveal what I think is the most common reason for a Mk5 Golf GTI failing its MOT test, and show you how to fix it for not an awful lot of money. But before we do that, I'd like to say big thanks to all subscribers, new and old. The numbers are going up like I've never ever seen before, and I can only put it down to this mouldy old car. So whatever the reason, big thanks. Every subscription still means a lot to a small channel like this one. If you haven't subscribed yet, then there could be an icon bottom right corner of your screen, or there's a link in the description of the video below, or seek out that black button. Thanks to the guy who pointed out it was now black. Seek out that black button, not the red button in these graphics. Press that and you'll be subscribed, and you won't miss out on any more content on this mouldy old car. And I think there's going to be a lot more coming up in the future, including a very long drive somewhere very significant. Anyway, I've got my gloves on. This is the dirty job. It's probably going to rain. I'll have to work on my driveway, but I think it's going to be worth it. Okay, so the most common reason I think a Mk5 Golf GTI will fail its MOT test is because of a split CV boot. So you can probably just about see there, the boot is split by the clip. I'll show you. There's some grease coming out of it. It's very early at this point, but it should be failed because that could go very quickly and cause a real mess. Luckily we haven't had it splattering around the wheel and the wheel arch as yet, but yeah, there's not long left on that. Rubber is a perishable part and it will fail in time. And if you think about how much these stretch when you turn the steering all that time for like the 70,000 miles or so this car's done, it's incredible they last so long. So we need to get this off, and to do that I've already kind of started. I've undone the big bolt there, which wasn't actually all that tight. Don't know if it's been disturbed before, I don't think so. And I've undone on the gearbox the 1, 2, 3, 6 bolts that hold the drive shaft flange to the gearbox. So according to some American sites you can just pull it out now, but I think that's only on the right hand side, the driver's side for the UK, because I can't. I've tried and I can't. So what I've done, I left it overnight. You can probably see there's a bit of something down there. I've sprayed the ball joint nuts with some plus gas, which is a release fluid. Probably won't make any difference, they'll probably break off, but at this point you hope they come off, because if they break then you've got to replace the ball joint, which gets a little bit more complicated, if not expensive. So what we're going to do now is go straight into getting those bolts, getting those nuts off, which will then allow us to pull the hub out and get the drive shaft out and then get the boot changed. Okay, so ball joint nuts off then, so 1, 2, 3. I'll give them another spray with this stuff plus gas. It's probably not going to make any difference now, but every little helps. What's important now is just being careful with how you undo them, so even going the wrong way, just to give them some warning that you want to undo them after like 13 years. So that's definitely an undo. It's tight. Something turned, but is it the whole thread or just the nut? That just feels like it's going to break off now. It just feels too easy. But amazingly, that is coming off. Okay, well it's no good getting one off and breaking the other two, so let's crack on. 17 mil by the way on this original part. Some of the replacement ones, even good ones like Lemforder, got slightly different size nuts. Just going to push it the other way now just to give it some warning, and then back onto loosen. Back a bit. Right, so he moves. Okay, now we need to just lever the wishbone down, and that should give us enough room to pop these threads out, and we should have then a drive shaft that wants to come out. Okay, I've got my mechanic's best friend out again, and we're just going to lever the wishbone down from the ball joint. And she's free. Well, how's that for a camera angle wheel arch cam? Okay, so it's a long way out. I can get the bar on the back of it, and here she comes. What we've got to do is remove the boot because it's starting to split. To do that we need to undo the clips. We can then cut the old boot off. That then gives us the opportunity to get the CV joints, this bit, off the shaft. It's retained by a circlip, which can be easy, can be hard, depending on what kind of day of the week it is. And then once that's off, we then have to clean out all the grease from the joint, although we're very lucky because it's only just started this split, so dirt won't have got in. If you've got it contaminated with dirt, you really need to get every single bit of grease out. We don't need to be that OCD with this, which makes this job a lot easier, a lot quicker. So we've cleaned it out. We then put the small clip on, then the boot, and then the joint back onto the shaft, and then we fill that full of grease and work it in, and then we put the big clip on, clip it all together, stick it back on the car. So yeah, let's get cracking. The only real tool you need that you might not have is this special tool that's designed for tightening up the clips on the CV boot. I should mention we're using this kit from Euro Car Parts. It's GK and Lobro. They're an OEM supplier, so no moaning about the quality of this part. It is OEM quality. £17.94 from Euro Car Parts. This is not a sponsored video, and I will prove that because I'm going to moan. In their picture for this part number 656444190, there's a picture of the drive shaft bolt. It's recommended you should replace that. It's not essential. I kind of suspected it wouldn't be in there, and lo and behold, it's not. But what we do have is the tough, proper boot, not one of these stretchy ones you can get over the CV joint without taking it apart. That's like a real shortcut that doesn't last as long. That's an OEM quality boot. 2 sachets of grease, which is very generous. The big clip, the small clip, the circlip, which I'm not sure I'm going to replace, because if the original one's in good condition, you should leave that. And a couple of washers, I'm not completely convinced will actually be required. We'll see what's actually in there when we take it apart. So yeah. Okay, well that's off. So the good news is there's quite a lot of grease still in there and it all looks pretty clean. That's brilliant news. Okay, I was hitting that with a hammer. I was hitting it round the edge of the joint. Some people sort of like to hit inside there, but that's sort of real sort of important bit. So this outer bit is really thick, and as you can see, there's no damage. And you can hold on to the end while you're doing that, instead of having like a punch in between you and the hammer and the joint. So if you have a look around there, you can see it's still in perfect condition. Yeah, that's where it should sit. There's a sort of indentation on the drive shaft for where the clip should go, and it's just happily sort of stuck in there. Okay, I put a bit of grease in the joint now, but we'll fill it up properly when it's on the shaft. So to refit it, just make sure it's lined up on the splines. That's really important. And I'm using a socket 32mm over the hub spline on the CV joint, just making sure it's square with the drive shaft, just tapping it on. And you know you're all the way home when you're up against the black washer that you replaced earlier. So let's just do that again. And that's home. Okay, now we're going to work the grease into the cage. Well guys, just a quick tip here, if you want to get this clip on from the GKN kit onto the boot, I'd put it on the boot first and then slide that onto the CV joint, because I spent ages trying to slide it down onto the boot when it was on the joint. It wasn't happening. It was a struggle to get it on even this way round, but it didn't take half as long as the time I wasted trying to get it on the other way. So it is really tight. There's barely anything to crimp up there, but I'll show you what we're going to do. Now there is a little flange on, there is a groove on the CV joint where a bit of the rubber from the boot should sit, so it's quite easy to see when the boot and the clip are in the right position. Okay, with the clip on now, we need to crimp it together so it's nice and tight, even though it's already quite tight. So these are the pliers that are designed for the job, and they look pretty normal apart from these two rectangles, which mean, or squares, where you can put some normal pliers in to give yourself a little bit more leverage. Okay, here we go. Let's make sure that's on. All right. As I said, it's quite tight anyway, so it probably won't move an awful lot, but we've got to do what we can. I can see it crimping a bit. Yeah, job's a good one. Job's a good one. Right, that's the dirty, messy bit done. Let's go and get it on the car. Okay, it's important to get this bit in the right order. So the first thing I think I'll do is put the spline of the CV joint through the hub and put the bolt in there to keep it a bit secure, and then line the inner joint with the gearbox flange, and then drop the ball joint back into the wishbone. And doing it that way means that when we need to tighten up these bolts, which are 10 Newton meters to start off with and 40 Newton meters, we can just lock the gearbox via the drive shaft with the screwdriver into the disc just here. That means we can get the correct torque onto there. So let's get cracking and do that. We're very, very close to going for that MOT finally now, unless I see something else down here I don't like the look of. No, it all looks all right. Okay, now I've got the drive shaft lined up with the flange. I just need to slot these bolts in there. So it's 10 Newton meters to start off with and 40 Newton meters diagonally, and that's done. Then tighten up the big bolts on there, put the don't forget those, the ball joint nuts on there, and we are done. Now after all that work, guys, you need to perform a thorough test drive just to make sure the car still steers correctly and brakes correctly, and there are no new rattles, which could mean that you've left something undone. As I confirmed in the last video, that's quite easy to do, but all feels pretty good. So all we need to do now is get the car warmed up and do another diagnostic scan just to make sure nothing new has appeared, and then I think we'll be ready for the MOT test. Okay, just going into the engine ECU, and yes, no fault codes found. Now with that fixed, I'm inclined now to look at the other parts of the car. There aren't that many modules being a Mark 5, but if we do an auto scan, we can see what we've got and if any modules have got any faults stored. So Autoscan basically just goes around all the modules and checks them for fault codes. And we've got two red modules. First one is CAN gateway, that's the communication network for the car. But worth looking at just in case it's important. And also central convenience, which is to do with the locking of the car, not really sort of category A level fault there, but we'll have a look at them now anyway. So we're going to the modules individually, starting with CAN gateway. And this says we have infotainment database in single wire operation. I've seen this a few times and I don't really know what causes it, but it's just to do with the head unit talking to other parts of the car, maybe the communication with the instrument cluster. So I'll look that up, but it's not that important to deal with it. It's just infotainment, of which we have very little. Flipping out, that's the B8RS4, that sounded really good. Now let's have a look at the central convenience module. Okay, it says the alarm horn H12 is faulty, 01134 is the code. Yeah, it's a hard fault that's come back again as well, so that's interesting, something to look out for in the future. I'm sure they're not expensive to replace, but yeah, so far that's really good. Well guys, thanks as ever for watching this volkswizard video. Keep commenting, do keep subscribing, and do subscribe if you don't want to miss episode 4, which should at last include the MOT test. I can't believe it's been pushed back all the way to episode 4. In that video, I'll also show you how to do an oil change on a Mk5 Golf GTI engine, whether it's 200 horsepower or the 230 edition 30. It's the most important way to keep your Mk5 Golf GTI engine healthy, and it's really easy to do. Most owners will be able to do it, and the way we're going to do it, it's really inexpensive as well, so keep a lookout for that. I'll also reveal in episode 5, the next episode after that one, the new wheel colour that Prestige Wheel Centre have painted the wheels in. That will begin the ball rolling on the cosmetic side of the project, which obviously is not as important as the mechanical side, but it's still important and going to get done. So guys, see you for the next one really soon, and keep your fingers crossed for that MOT test.